official. I'm walking into the park. And there's a goosey. And there's the dam I just walked over. It's hard to do this while holding a camera. Ah. There it goes. Good morning. It's 8:30. It's raining. I am officially in Smoky Mountains National Park. I hiked over Fontana Dam today, and we're on the climb up into the mountains. Yesterday was the zero in Robbinsville. Remind me to tell you this story about the laundromat sometime. I am also alone today. One of the things that surprised me about this trail is how fast relationships form. Bright Spot is injured, and it's not my story to tell, so I'm not going to tell it. But she is off the trail for at least a week, and I am heartbroken for my friend. Get better, girl. Sucks. But you're never really alone on the AT. In fact, I can hear people coming. So I'm going to keep this short. It's also raining and cold. Not super cold, but the wind is picking up. So our shelter is about 10 miles from where I'm standing. There's a campsite less than that. We're going to see how it feels today. Food can, very heavy, very full. So here's to getting up these hills. Don't think I'm going to get much of a view from Shuckstock today, because, yeah, I can't see very far at all. So let's get hiking. For a minute there, I'm pretty sure I can see Shuckstock Tower up there. Yeah, that's it above the trees. Guess where I'm not going today. I'm going by, but I'm not going up there. Probably the best view we're gonna get today. Alright, apparently that's the trail up to the tower, but I'm going this way because what am I gonna see anyway? Oh, hi. So this is Jessica of the future, safely ensconced in a hotel room. And I think after nearly a week, I'm finally ready to talk about what happened on this particular day. I'm gonna insert this video into the day's videos, even though it's a little bit out of sync, but it's taken me a little while to process everything, I guess you could say. So on this day, I was hiking out of Fontana and I knew it was going to rain, but I didn't want to spend more money on a hotel room. And honestly, a lot of the people that I ended up talking to on this day said they didn't realize how bad it was going to be either. So I'll give myself a little bit of a pass on that, but $100 between life and death, it's a pretty stupid choice. So anyway, I decided to hike out. Bright Spot and her husband Ray dropped me off at Fontana Dam, and it's much colder than it was when we were leaving our hotel room. And that probably should have been my first clue. But I had already committed to hiking out, so threw on the rain gear and start hiking out. And of course, we're going into the Smokies, so the elevation is higher and it's only going to get higher. And so I'm hiking along and I'm doing okay for a while, but eventually I start to get really wet because in those conditions that you've already seen in this video, there's no way any rain gear is going to keep you dry, especially for 12 miles that I ended up doing. So I start getting wet and it's cold and I start getting cold. And in the first couple of hours, I was passed by 3 or 4 other hikers. But after that, I didn't see another person. So I'm hiking along and I probably should have looked this up, but there was a campsite that was less than 12 miles in. I think it was either 4 or 8 or something like that. And when I got to that point, it was cold, it was still raining, the fog was doing what it does in the Smokies and the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I think at that point I knew I was in trouble, and I knew that I needed to be around people or it might not go well. So I decided to push on to the shelter, which was about 12 miles in for the day. And 12 miles is still a lot, especially with the elevation gain for me at this point. So I kept going, and typical of the Appalachian Trail, of course, it goes straight up, it goes straight down. The rain turned the trail into what I affectionately call the Appalachian River. So at this point, your shoes are soaked, your socks are soaked, and I just am walking straight through this muddy river because it doesn't make any sense to try to avoid it. The only problem being with my back injury, where other people might slip and fall and it will suck, for me that could be catastrophic. So as I'm going along, I am trying not to fall, and it's slippery and the mud is crazy. And even if you try to hike off the trail, it was so saturated, the ground felt like it was melting underneath my feet no matter what I did. And especially going downhill, you're not generating as much heat. So I got to the point where at one point, like, my hands were so cold, the palms of my hands were frozen, and I couldn't even open up my hands to adjust my trekking poles or anything. Like, my hands felt like they were frozen to my trekking poles. And that's when I really knew that I was potentially in a lot of trouble. I remember just wanting to check far out, like we all typically do out here, to see how much farther was, and just telling myself it doesn't matter, you just have to get there. I remember stumbling a couple of times and basically like yelling at myself to not stumble, because when you learn about hypothermia, you learn about the umbles, stumbling, mumbling, that sort of thing, like tripping over your words. And I knew if I started stumbling that I was hypothermic and I maybe was really in trouble. And I just kept telling myself, keep going, keep going, keep going. You have to keep going. So I keep going along, and about 0.2 from the shelter, somebody finally comes up behind me, and this guy, I was starting to think that my mind was playing tricks on me, like I was getting that cold. And the next thing I know, he's talking about checking far out to see where the heck this shelter is, because he's cold and he's soaking wet and he's looking for the shelter too. And I figured, like, okay, that can't be my mind playing tricks on me. That's an actual human. And I think he was probably aware at that point that I was in trouble, because I think I was already crying at that point. So he checked far out. He's like, it's only 2.2 away. You lead. And I remember saying to him, I'm not very fast. You might want to go ahead of me. He was like, no, we're like, it's camaraderie now. And thank God for him. And I don't think I ever got his name, but I think he knew that if I didn't keep going, it wasn't going to be good too. So we finally get to the shelter, and I keep describing this to people as like, it was like a scene from the old Muppet Show with like everybody hanging out of there. I didn't think there was going to be anybody there, because I figured nobody else could be as stupid as I was to go out in these crazy conditions. So I'm expecting like basically nobody to be there. And there were so many people there. I think that shelter was supposed to hold 12. I'm pretty sure we put close to 16 or 18 people in that shelter that night. A lot of people were tenting already around the shelter, which I still couldn't believe. So I come around the corner, I see all these people, and I basically start crying hysterically. The guy that came up behind me, he's like trying to get me to sit near the fire, and I don't know what was going on in my mind other than I was overwhelmed, and I was just glad that I was finally at the shelter. So I sat near the fire for a bit. The next thing I know, somebody's giving me hot tea. And this woman, I believe her name was Navigator. You pretty much saved my life that day. Thank you, if you ever see this. So she says to me, I'm going to go into your pack. We're going to get you out of these wet clothes, etc., etc. I'm saying all this stuff because this is my journal of all this, and I want to remember my dumb mistakes and the kindness of others. So she starts opening up my pack. She starts pulling everything out. People in the shelter made room for me. And literally, I ended up stripping down to nothing, because even my underwear is wet at this point and needed to come off. So everything comes off. She gets me into warm clothes. She gives me some of her food, and I get up into the shelter and get into my sleeping bag, and I shivered and shivered and shivered. And at some point they were checking on me, and they're like, are you getting warm? And I'm like, kind of. And somebody found my little mini Nalgene bottle, like my 16-ounce Nalgene that I've been using. And thank God I had that thing, because somebody boiled water, put it in there, found one of my clean socks, threw it around it, and I stuck that thing between my legs. And that was probably the thing that finally got me warm. So to anybody who was in that shelter, I believe it was Molly's Ridge shelter on a Saturday night, thank you, because you pretty much saved my life. As you'll see in future videos, I've spent many of the next several days basically beating myself up for being so stupid. Because the biggest thing I could think of was what would happen to my family if something happened to me. All because I wanted to do this silly thing. And obviously that's still that still hurts. I really could have messed up really bad. And it's the people that get left behind that have to really deal with it. So I made a stupid mistake. I wasn't the only one who did that day, but I was in worse shape than I think than a lot of them. There was a guy whose trail name was Smoke Master. I told him his trail name should have been Lifesaver, because he got a fire going in the shelter. Like, pretty much all of the Smoky shelters have fireplaces in them, and he got a fire going in that thing, and he kept it going, and he was rotating people's clothes through to dry things out. And thank you for sure. All of us would have been a lot worse off without you. I've been struggling with continuing on since then, but there was no way out but through. You'll see in future videos that I've made it farther down the trail, and obviously I'm not in a tent and I'm not on the trail right now. So, spoiler alert, I keep going. But it was a really, really scary day. It only takes one bad decision. I got super lucky. As Steve Adams just told me, since I just told him this story, you know Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail podcast, I just told him this story. I experienced the ultimate trail magic that day, for sure. So, I think the biggest thing I want to say to anybody who's watching this, the next time you hear a search and rescue story that doesn't go well, and so many people criticize when those stories come up, it can happen to anybody. It only takes one bad decision. And it easily could have been me. So, save your judgment, and maybe just remember that not a single one of us is infallible. Some of us just get luckier than others. Thanks for watching my driveling on. Onward.